Sky News live from West London, where in the past hour the number of those confirmed dead in the Grenfell Tower fire has risen again.
We always knew the number of those that had died would increase. And I'm able to say at this point in time, we know that at least 30 people have died as a result of this fire.
The Queen and Prince William have met survivors of the disaster as well as some of the firefighters who ran towards the flames. The royal visit comes as anger is directed at the government for its lack of action.
Why is Theresa May coming here with a load of police walking around, not meeting no one, not meeting the family? Who is now at the Westway Centre? There's victims there. Is there anyone from your party there?
Theresa May has now visited victims in hospital after being criticised for failing to meet residents during her visit yesterday.
This is Andrew Shakir, my sister. This is her husband, Bezen Shakir.
Desperate families wait for news as harrowing tales emerge of the firefighters who tried to help.
He was literally having to choose who he was going to save and who he was going to allow to stay and die because he only had 2 hands to take out a certain amount of people at one time. It's absolutely devastating.
This is Sky News live from West London, where in the past hour police have said that the number of those confirmed dead in the Grenfell Tower fire has risen to 30. The Queen and her grandson, Prince William, have met victims of the disaster, as well as firefighters and others involved in the relief effort. Meanwhile, Theresa May visited the injured in hospital and is due to chair a Whitehall meeting this hour to coordinate the government's response. Well, she's been heavily criticised for failing to meet residents when she came to the scene yesterday. Let's begin with the update provided by the police this afternoon.
Sadly, as I've said before, we always knew the number of those that had died would increase. And I'm able to say at this point in time, we know that at least 30 people have died as a result of this fire. Sadly and tragically, that includes one person who was taken to hospital and despite the very best medical care from the NHS, has now sadly died. 12 of those victims have been taken to the mortuary, and a number of those bodies sadly still remain here within Grenfell Tower. The latest update from the hospitals is that we still have 24 people who are being treated. 12 of those are in critical care. We have specialist and dedicated family liaison officers supporting 36 families. Through our Casualty Bureau and through the Reception Centre, and through indeed the coverage that has been out on the media over the last couple of days, I have a request that if you are a family member and a police officer has not yet contacted you directly, if you're able to, please go to the Westway Reception Centre or phone the Casualty Bureau on 0800 0961 233, and a specialist officer will be in touch with you to support you. At this point in time, there are no fires within the building. Our specialist investigators and experts have examined what we believe is the original location where the fire started. And based on what we know, there is nothing to suggest at this time that the fire was started deliberately. As we've said before, the conditions within Grenfell Tower are particularly hazardous. It is going to take us a considerable period of time to fully work through Grenfell Tower over the coming weeks to ensure that we complete our investigation here within the building itself. As an absolute priority, what we're all doing is as quickly and with as much dignity as we can recovering those that are still inside.
Commander Stuart Cundy there a short while before. Well, just before lunchtime, the Queen and her grandson, Prince William, visited survivors and firefighters involved in the rescue in the early hours of Wednesday.
terrible, the concept of the shooting. I was very upset. And then we stopped hearing the voices. It was really horrible.
Yeah, I live right up it. We were evacuated about 1 o'clock. The flames just...
I'm actually, I'm a local resident. We came here at 7 a.m. on the day of the fire. We've been here since, just trying to organise
With me now, our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills. Rhiannon, was a surprise to everyone. We had no idea that the Queen would be visiting today.
No, we were only told about half an hour before they made that visit to the Westway Sports Centre, where we've seen a lot of the efforts being coordinated, those who've been left homeless visiting there. And I think for the royal family, it's very important when this kind of event happens to get that response right. And I think seeing the Queen accompanied by her grandson was obviously decided that that was the best approach today. They spent about 50 minutes in total, standing outside, taking a lot of time talking to some of the firefighters who were involved, but also some of the local residents as well. And I think over the last few hours or so, we have seen criticism, haven't we, of politicians maybe not engaging with the community. But I think that is what the royal family think it's important for them to do. And for the Queen, it's not just her role as head of state, we obviously know the constitutional importance of that, but also there is that more different role as head of the nation, where she is seen as this unifying figure. So not just to this part of the show the royal family's response, but also I think showing that the rest of the family have that sense of solidarity with those who've been affected by this fire.
And accompanied by Prince William, and we know that Prince William
We'll be back to West London for you shortly. You're seeing pictures right now of the Queen where she visited the Westway Sports Centre a few hours ago, meeting victims of the Grenfell Tower fire, and as well as speaking to emergency services there as well. Earlier, the Leader of the House of Commons, Andrea Leadsom, faced tough questions from residents about where Prime Minister Theresa May was yesterday, as she tried to reassure them about what's being done. Let's hear what she had to say.
That various ministers have been here, and I think a number have tried to come here more privately to try and talk to residents and to try and give practical support, and that I'm sure will continue.
Yeah, there's a question. Why privately?
Basically, yes.
Why has Sadiq Khan, Corbyn have come down here, not with all the stunt of bodyguards and police, and have come down here and spoke to people and actually down to level? Why is Theresa May coming here with a load of police, walking around, not meeting no one, not meeting a family? Who is now at the Westway Centre? There's victims there. Is there anyone from your party there?
You've come down here. Were you sent here, or have you decided to come here on your own?
I've come here as Leader of the House of Commons to represent the House of Commons, which is for all members of Parliament. This emergency briefing we had yesterday, you could absolutely feel the sympathy and the horror and the real sense of tragedy, and I think MPs from the government down to the newest backbenchers are just desperately wanting to help residents here. So I've come myself today to try and understand if there's any practical support that I can give in trying to move things on to deal with the immediate problem.
You're hearing here, this man here said it's not enough. We're here saying that these private meetings are no good. There's a lot of anger. What's being done to reassure people?
Well, I've had some discussions with residents today, and I've heard a number of specific pieces of feedback about individual cases and more general points which I want to take away and go and make some action on.
You must sense the anger. You must sense the anger.
I absolutely do, and I totally understand it. I mean, it is devastating, absolutely devastating, and of course I do sense the anger, and I'm completely sympathetic. I utterly understand how appalling this
You
is.
know, right, that this could have been stopped. You know that, right? You know, this fire could have been stopped long time ago, because this block and every single other block in this area is suffering the same way, suffering the exact same way. There is basic stuff. There's not even sprinklers in there. That could have cost £200,000 just to do that. They had £10 million to spend. They spent 8.6 million. Where is the rest of the money?
I mean, you know, as the Prime Minister said, there will be a full public inquiry. As we discussed yesterday, it's also vital that we look at what can be done in the very early short-term period to look at if there are things that need to be checked. I know in Northamptonshire, for example, my own chief fire officer is going to check every high-rise building in terms of fire safety. There's a lot of fire officers around the country again to make sure that this couldn't happen again, but it doesn't help Grenfell Tower.
Will there be money? You've touched on something very important here. Will there be money made available for sprinklers?
You know, the ministers are looking very carefully at all of the implications, whether there are quick wins that can be done, and in which case they will be done, and of course the longer term policies. But in the very short term, I know, as I say, that there are fire officers all around the country looking very closely to make sure that nothing like this could happen again in the short term.
Andrea Leadsom there talking to many of the local people and residents affected. A lot of anger, as we saw there in that interview. Well, Chris Philp, the Conservative MP for Croydon, is in our Westminster studio, and from what we're hearing here and from what we've seen, particularly in that interview there with Andrea Leadsom, a lot of anger from people on the streets here. Are you happy with the way that the Conservative government has dealt with this?
Well, look, I think it was right for Theresa May yesterday to go and meet with the emergency services to make sure, crucially, the day after this happened, that they had all the help and support they needed. I see that she's gone to a hospital in the local area just an hour or two ago to meet with the victims. That was clearly the right thing to do. But what is really important now, as we heard on the clip a second ago, is that there is an urgent investigation, a public inquiry led by a High Court judge. But more urgently than that, we need, I think there is a review of every tall building in the country to make sure any safety issues are identified immediately. What happened 2 days ago there should never have happened. Clearly a 24-storey building shouldn't be engulfed in flames in the way that was. And we need to make sure we find out what the problem was. Was it the cladding? Was it the lack of sprinklers? Or was it something else? And whatever it was that let that terrible event happen must never, ever be allowed to happen again in this country.
Do you think that Prime Minister Theresa May was wrong not to meet with any of the people affected by this fire yesterday? Much criticism from them. They felt that she parachuted in, spent some 15 minutes, and then left not having spoken to a single person in the area.
Well, I think her priority was obviously making sure the emergency services, who are still in the Midlands, still are in the middle of doing a very difficult job, have the support they need. And I think just, you know, a matter of hours after this tragedy happened, having the Prime Minister descend with a media scrum possibly isn't what people need when they're dealing with very recent and very raw grief, or are still searching for missing loved ones.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that's what they said they wanted. They wanted to have a Prime Minister that empathised with them, that actually spoke to them, a Prime Minister that was within reach, not someone that was at a distance, and not a lead figure that they could look to.
Yeah, look, I think that's why she's come back this morning and gone to the hospital to directly visit the people who are still recovering from their injuries. So I think that's what she's done today.
The investigation, as we know, the Prime Minister says that there'll be a full public inquiry. What should be paramount? What should be at the top of their list of items they need to really address today?
Well, I think the most important thing is to work out what it is that went terribly wrong in this building, because this should clearly never have happened. So the top priority, which only needs to happen in a matter of weeks, not a year or two, we need to work out what it was that went wrong, and if the same fault exists in any other building or any number of buildings in this country, that fault needs to be rectified in every single building as a matter of urgency. Clearly there may be wider lessons to learn about how frequently we look at fire safety, so that's a longer term project for the public inquiry. Priority number one is making sure in a matter of weeks or days that this never happens again anywhere.
In your constituency of Croydon, do you know how many high-rise blocks there are of this ilk?
Well, across the country, there are 4,000 high-rise blocks that were built before it became mandatory to have sprinkler systems. So in 2007, it became mandatory for every new building above 30 metres, which is about 8 or 10 stories, had to have sprinkler systems. There are 4,000 that don't. In my constituency, Croydon South, off the top of my head, I can think of about 7 or 8 blocks which are over that height. And I understand that Croydon Council, our local council, in common with many other councils, are urgently performing checks on those buildings to see if there's any immediate risk.
Do you know how many blocks in your constituency have sprinklers today?
No, I don't, but they were mostly, I think all of them I'm thinking of, were built before 2007, so there's a very significant chance that they don't have sprinklers. Now, after the Lakanal fire in 2009, the coroner in 2013, when he wrote his report, said that the government should write to social housing providers, so local councils and registered social landlords, suggesting to them that they consider installing sprinklers. And the government did that at the time, and some councils and RSLs responded. I think one thing that this public inquiry should definitely look at, and again that should happen sooner rather than later, is whether we should make it mandatory, so a legal requirement for all of those 4,000 buildings to have sprinkler systems retrofitted. So if they didn't have a sprinkler system when they were built, should one be installed now? And that is a very pressing question that I think the public inquiry needs to address.
Quite possibly there are people in your constituency who will have to go to sleep in high-rise blocks tonight without sprinkler systems. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that the local council in Croydon is checking buildings as we speak to assess any risk. Clearly, I mean, what happened in Grenfell Tower 2 days ago shouldn't have happened, even if the sprinklers, even if there were sprinklers. Something extraordinarily bad happened there that is outside of any sort of experience we've had of tower blocks in this country in history. So we need to find out what it was that went wrong, and we need to make sure there are no other blocks in the country which have this, whatever the defect was. And I'd say to residents in Croydon that the council is checking your blocks as we speak, and I know councils across the country are doing the same as a matter of urgency.
Okay, Chris Philp, MP for Croydon, thank you very much for speaking to us.